I still remember clutching my teddy bear against my chest as my parents dropped me off at Westfield Academy on that crisp September morning. I was 9 years old, and they promised this elite boarding school in Connecticut would give me the best opportunities for my future. They said they would visit often and call every week. As their silver sedan disappeared down the tree-lined driveway, I felt something deep in my stomach that I could not quite name. Looking back now, it was the first taste of abandonment that would define the next 9 years of my life. Before I share what happened next, let me ask where you are watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, what I discovered 9 years later will change how you see family forever. Let us dive in. Walking through the grand entrance of Westfield Academy felt like stepping into a movie set. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and oil paintings of distinguished alumni lined the mahogany-paneled walls. This place screamed old money and privilege, everything my parents wanted me to be surrounded by. As the youngest student in my grade, I quickly learned that fitting in required more than just good manners. The other kids had been groomed for this life since birth, speaking in polished accents about their families' vacation homes in the Hamptons or ski trips to Switzerland. I met Madison, a vibrant girl with golden curls who took me under her wing during my first week. There was also Tyler, a quiet boy with thick-rimmed glasses who preferred reading in the library corner to socializing in the common room. My days fell into a structured rhythm of classes, piano lessons, tennis practice, and study hall. The teachers were demanding but fair, pushing us to excel in everything from calculus to classical literature. I threw myself into academics, hoping that if I worked hard enough, my parents would be proud when they came to visit. But those visits never came. The first week passed without a phone call. My parents had promised to call every Sunday evening, but the dormitory phone remained silent. When I asked Ms. Patterson, our student advisor, about it, she smiled warmly and assured me that my parents were simply adjusting to having me away. "They will call soon, sweetheart," she said, patting my shoulder with practiced comfort. The first month brought only 2 brief letters, each one shorter than the last. The handwriting looked rushed, almost impersonal, filled with generic phrases about hoping I was doing well and working hard. There were no personal details, no inside jokes, no mentions of our family dog or my favorite foods. They felt like form letters written by strangers. When Parents' Weekend arrived in October, I spent hours getting ready. I ironed my uniform perfectly, practiced my piano piece one last time, and waited by the main entrance with barely contained excitement. One by one, I watched my classmates run into the arms of their families. Madison's parents brought her little brother and a basket of homemade cookies. Tyler's mother kissed his forehead and ruffled his hair while his father asked about his latest science project. I stood there until sunset, my heart sinking with each passing hour. Ms. Patterson finally approached me with that same sympathetic smile. "Your parents had an unexpected business trip to Europe that could not be postponed," she explained. "They are terribly sorry and will make it up to you next time." That night, I cried into my pillow while my roommate Sarah tried to comfort me. The ache in my chest felt like a physical wound, raw and throbbing. I kept telling myself that important business deals sometimes came up. Suddenly, that successful parents like mine had demanding schedules. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something was not right. The pattern continued through my second year. Every major school event, every holiday, every opportunity for families to visit my parents had an excuse. Ms. Patterson always had explanations ready. They were dealing with a merger. They were traveling for work. They were handling important legal matters. The school assured me that my tuition payments arrived on schedule through their lawyer, so there was nothing to worry about financially. I began to notice how the staff treated me differently from other students. They were extra gentle, extra patient, as if I were fragile china that might break at any moment. The kitchen staff always made sure I got extra dessert. The groundskeeper, Mr. Jenkins, would stop and chat with me during his rounds, asking about my classes and telling me stories about the wildlife on campus. Thanksgiving of my second year was when the cracks in the facade became impossible to ignore. Every other student went home for the 4-day weekend, leaving Westfield eerily quiet. I remained on campus with 3 international students whose families lived too far away to visit. Ms. Patterson explained that my parents were dealing with some family complications that made travel impossible right now. Sitting in the nearly empty dining hall, sharing turkey with kids whose parents lived in China and Brazil, I felt a loneliness so deep it seemed to echo in my bones. These other students had legitimate reasons for being here. Their families loved them but lived across oceans. What was my excuse? That night, I made my first real attempt to call home. I had memorized our phone number, of course, but when I dialed it from the payphone in the dormitory hallway, I got a recording saying the number was no longer in service. When I asked Ms. Patterson about it the next day, she told me my parents had changed their number for security reasons and would provide the new one soon. They never did. By my 4th year at Westfield, I had learned to stop asking questions that never received real answers. At 13, I channeled my confusion and hurt into becoming the perfect student. My grades were flawless, my behavior exemplary, my extracurricular involvement extensive. If I could not have my parents' presence, at least I could earn their pride through achievement. It was during this time that I accidentally stumbled upon the first real clue about my situation. I had been helping Ms. Patterson organize files in her office when a folder slipped from my hands, spilling documents across the floor. As I scrambled to collect them, one particular letter caught my attention. The letterhead read, "Brennan and Associates Legal Services," and the visible portion mentioned, "Trust fund payments continue as scheduled and maintain current arrangements until subject reaches majority." My blood ran cold. Trust fund. Current arrangements. Subject. I was not a daughter being supported by loving parents. I was a subject being managed by legal arrangements. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. None of them were good. Over the following weeks, I began paying closer attention to conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, to the careful way staff members chose their words around me, to the absence of any direct contact information for my parents. I started spending my free time in the school library, learning how to use the computers that had recently been installed. The internet was still relatively new, but I was determined to find answers. I searched for my family name, my parents' names, any trace of the life I remembered from before Westfield. What I found was nothing. No business listings, no social records, no trace that they had ever existed beyond my memories. When I turned 15, my computer skills had improved enough to attempt something I never thought I would do. I hacked into the school's email system. It took me 3 months of careful work learning programming languages in secret and covering my digital tracks. But eventually, I gained access to the administrative files. What I discovered there shattered the last remaining pieces of my childhood. My parents had died in a car accident 3 months after dropping me off at Westfield. I had been living as an orphan for 6 years without knowing it. The trust fund that supported me came from my maternal grandparents, people I had never met who had died when I was very young. My legal guardian was Harold Brennan, a lawyer I had never spoken to who had apparently decided that keeping me ignorant of my situation was in my best interest. The email chain between Brennan and the school was extensive. He had specifically requested that they not inform me of my parents' deaths until I graduated, believing that the stability of remaining at Westfield was more important than the truth. The school had been paid handsomely for their cooperation in this deception. I printed everything I could find and hid the documents under my mattress. For days, I could barely function. I attended classes like a ghost spoke when spoken to, but felt completely disconnected from my body. The grief hit me in waves, not just for my parents, but for the 6 years of mourning I had been denied. I grieved for the little girl who had waited by windows, for visitors who would never come, who had blamed herself for not being worth visiting. The anger came next, burning white hot in my chest. Every adult I trusted had lied to me. Every comforting explanation had been a calculated deception. They had stolen my right to mourn, my right to understand my own life, my right to make informed decisions about my future. I stopped talking to my friends. Madison tried repeatedly to draw me out, but I could not bear the thought of pretending everything was normal. Tyler noticed my withdrawal and left small notes of encouragement in my locker, but even his kindness felt hollow against the magnitude of the betrayal I was processing. I threw myself into my studies with a desperate intensity. If I was truly alone in the world, then I needed to be prepared to take care of myself. I researched colleges, scholarships, career paths, anything that would give me independence the moment I turned 18. I would never again be dependent on people who thought they knew what was best for me. The final 3 years at Westfield passed in a blur of academic achievement and emotional numbness. I graduated as valedictorian, earned early admission to several prestigious universities, and maintained the facade of being a normal teenager. But inside, I was counting down the days until I could escape the elaborate lie that had become my life. Graduation day arrived on a perfect June morning. The campus buzzed with excitement as families streamed in for the ceremony. Parents snapped photos, siblings ran around in their best clothes, and grandparents settled into folding chairs with proud smiles. The sight of all these intact families should have filled me with the old familiar ache, but instead, I felt nothing but cold determination. I had spent months planning for this day, not with hope of reunion, but with the knowledge that it would mark my final break from everyone who had participated in the deception of my life. I sat in the front row with the other honor students, watching my classmates wave to their families in the audience. When my name was called and I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I looked out at hundreds of faces and felt completely alone. After the ceremony, the campus transformed into a celebration. Families gathered for photos, shared meals, and talked about summer plans and college preparations. I stood apart from it all, watching the scene like an outsider looking through a window at someone else's life. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my teenage years, but all I felt was a hollow sense of completion. Ms. Patterson approached me hesitantly, her usual warm smile replaced by something that looked almost like guilt. "Celeste, honey, I know this day must be difficult for you," she began, but I cut her off with a look that could freeze water. "I want to speak with Principal Williams," I said quietly. "Right now." The color drained from her face. She nodded and led me toward the administrative building without another word. I think she knew that the reckoning she had been dreading for years had finally arrived. Principal Williams was in his office, still wearing his graduation robes, when we knocked on his door. He looked up from some paperwork and his expression immediately became guarded when he saw my face. This was not going to be a pleasant conversation, and we all knew it. "Celeste," he said carefully, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Congratulations on your achievements today. You should be very proud." "I know my parents are dead," I said without preamble. "I know they died when I was 9. I know about the trust fund, about Harold Brennan, about the instructions to keep me in the dark until graduation. I know everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Williams and Patterson exchanged a look that confirmed everything I suspected. Finally, the principal cleared his throat and attempted to salvage the situation. "Celeste, I understand you are upset, but you must understand that everything we did was in your best interest," he began. "You were so young when the tragedy occurred. Mr. Brennan and your grandparents believed that allowing you to remain stable and happy at Westfield was the kindest option." "Kindest?" I stood up, my voice rising, despite my efforts to stay calm. "You stole 9 years of my life. You made me think I was abandoned when I was actually orphaned. You let me blame myself for not being worth visiting when the truth was that there was nobody left to visit me." "We were protecting you," Patterson interjected weakly. "You were protecting yourselves," I shot back. "You took money to lie to a child. You robbed me of my right to grieve, my right to know who I really was, my right to make decisions about my own life. How dare you call that protection?" Williams tried a different approach. "What is done cannot be undone, Celeste, but you have a bright future ahead of you. Your college plans, your trust fund. When you turn 21, all of that is still intact. You can move forward now. Move forward." I laughed bitterly. How am I supposed to trust my own judgment about people when everyone I depended on spent years lying to my face? How am I supposed to believe anyone ever again? The conversation continued for another hour, with both administrators attempting to justify their actions, while I systematically dismantled every excuse they offered. Finally, Williams provided me with Harold Brennan's contact information and a sealed envelope containing the details of my financial situation. I left his office feeling emotionally drained, but also strangely empowered. For the first time in years, I was dealing with the truth instead of carefully crafted lies. It hurt, but it was real. My phone call with Harold Brennan that evening was equally illuminating and infuriating. He spoke to me like a business transaction, explaining the terms of my inheritance with the emotional warmth of someone reading a grocery list. The trust fund would become fully accessible when I turned 21. Until then, I had access to $5,000 for immediate expenses and was expected to support myself through college and beyond. "Your grandparents wanted to ensure you would be self-sufficient," he explained in his nasal voice. "They believed that earning your own way would build character." "What about my parents' assets?" I asked. "Their house, their belongings, their personal effects?" "Sold to pay debts and legal fees," he replied matter-of-factly. "I am afraid there was nothing left of sentimental value." Nothing left. 9 years of lies, and at the end of it, I had $5,000 and a trust fund I could not touch for 3 more years. I was 18 years old with no family, no home, no safety net, and no idea how to navigate the world as an adult. But as I sat in my empty dormitory room that night, surrounded by packed boxes and the detritus of my Westfield years, I felt something unexpected rising in my chest. It was not hope exactly, but it was determination. These people had controlled my narrative for too long. From now on, I would write my own story. I packed my belongings into 2 suitcases and a backpack. Everything I owned in the world fit into those 3 bags. The next morning, while the campus was still quiet, I walked away from Westfield Academy forever. I did not say goodbye to anyone. There was no one left who deserved a goodbye. The Greyhound bus to Hartford cost $37 and took 2 hours. As the Connecticut countryside rolled past the window, I felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration that I had never experienced before. For the first time in my life, nobody knew where I was going or what I was doing. The freedom was intoxicating and absolutely terrifying. I found a small efficiency apartment in a rundown neighborhood near downtown Hartford. The rent was $450 a month, which would eat through my savings quickly, but it was clean and safe. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who asked for first month last month and security deposit in cash. She looked at my age with skepticism, but accepted my money without asking too many questions. My first night alone in that tiny apartment was the longest of my life. I had spent 9 years surrounded by hundreds of other students with structured schedules and constant supervision. The silence was overwhelming. I sat on the floor eating a peanut butter sandwich for dinner, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. But when morning came, I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt free. Finding a job proved easier than I expected. Martha's Diner. A 24-hour restaurant near the bus station hired me as a waitress after a 5-minute interview. The work was hard, and the customers were not always pleasant, but Martha herself was a tough, fair woman who paid in cash and did not ask about my background. I worked the overnight shift, which paid slightly better and allowed me to take community college classes during the day. Those first few months were brutal. I was exhausted, constantly living on coffee and whatever food I could afford from the diner. But gradually, I began to build something that resembled a life. I enrolled at Hartford Community College and threw myself into my studies with the same intensity I had shown at Westfield. This time, though, I was learning for myself, not to impress parents who were never coming home. It was at the diner that I met Sarah, a single mother in her 20s who worked the evening shift. She was the first person I had trusted with even pieces of my story, and her matter-of-fact acceptance of my situation helped me realize that I was not as broken as I felt. Sarah had been on her own since 16, supporting herself and her young daughter through a combination of work school and sheer determination. "You survived something that would destroy most people," she told me one night during a quiet moment between customers. "Do not let them win by convincing yourself you are damaged goods." Her words stayed with me as I navigated my way through college applications, scholarship essays, and the 1,000 small challenges of independent living. I learned to cook, to budget, to fix things when they broke, to advocate for myself in situations where I felt overwhelmed. Each small victory built my confidence a little more. When I received a full scholarship to the University of Connecticut, I cried for the first time since learning about my parents. They were tears of relief and pride and grief all mixed together. I was going to make it. I was going to build a life that nobody could take away from me. College was a revelation. Surrounded by other students who were focused on their futures rather than their pasts, I flourished academically and socially. I chose to double major in business and psychology, drawn to understanding both how organizations function and how people heal from trauma. My professors were impressed by my work ethic and maturity, though I never told them why I was so driven. I made real friends for the first time since childhood. There was Jennifer, my roommate, who shared my love of late-night study sessions and terrible reality TV. There was Marcus, who helped me understand that not all families were perfect and that choosing your own support system was not a sign of failure. There was Dr. Rodriguez, my psychology professor, who became a mentor and helped me understand that my experiences at Westfield were not my fault. During my senior year, I received an offer to join a prestigious consulting firm in New York City. The starting salary was more than I had imagined possible, with benefits and opportunities for advancement that seemed almost too good to be true. When I accepted the position, I felt like I was finally stepping into the life I was meant to have. The day I turned 21, I received access to my trust fund. The amount was substantial enough to buy a small apartment in Manhattan and provide a safety net I had never known before. But more importantly than the money, I realized that I no longer needed it for survival. I had built my own life, earned my own security, created my own sense of belonging in the world. Standing in my new office on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, looking out at the city spread below me, I thought about that 9-year-old girl who had been dropped off at boarding school so long ago. I thought about the 18-year-old who had walked away from Westfield with 2 suitcases and $5,000. Both of those versions of myself had been stronger than they knew. I never contacted Harold Brennan again after our conversation on graduation day. I never returned to Westfield for alumni events or reunions. I did not seek revenge against the people who had lied to me for so long. Instead, I chose to focus on building something beautiful from the rubble of those early betrayals. In therapy, which I started during my second year in New York, I learned to separate the actions of others from my own worth. The abandonment I felt was real, but it was not a reflection of my value as a person. The lies I had been told were cruel, but they had also taught me to rely on my own judgment and strength. I learned that family is not just about blood relations or legal obligations. Sarah remained one of my closest friends, celebrating my promotions and supporting me through difficult days. My chosen family grew to include colleagues who became confidants, neighbors who became surrogate siblings, and mentors who filled some of the parental void in healthy ways. On quiet Sunday mornings in my apartment, I sometimes think about my parents and wonder what they would think of the woman I became. I believe they would be proud not just of my professional success, but of my resilience and my refusal to let bitterness define me. I learned that holding on to anger was like swallowing poison and expecting the other person to die. The girl who was dropped off at boarding school at 9 and forgotten until graduation became a woman who understands that sometimes the people who hurt us teach us exactly how strong we really are. I learned that home is not a place you come from, but something you build for yourself out of love, determination, and the courage to keep trusting even after trust has been broken. If you have ever felt abandoned or betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, I want you to know that your story does not end with their failures. Your worth is not determined by how others treated you, but by how you choose to treat yourself and others moving forward. What experiences in your own life have taught you about resilience and finding your inner strength? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming adversity and building the life you deserve. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they are stronger than they know. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow from the deepest soil. Until next time, keep building your own beautiful life.